This is the way we like to think of our rivers and harbors, quaintly, with visions of rocky woods, lazy, clean rivers, tourist poster stuff. Well, this quaint little lazy river is the Charles. Like others that empty into the harbor, it rises in our surrounding suburbs, in full view of the downtown towers. It's a delightful little polluted river, on its way to a delightful, big, polluted harbor. Crossed and crisscrossed by bridges, bordered, hemmed in, and sealed off by roads. It's used for pleasure, and many get pleasure from it, as long as they don't fall in. The Charles River and Basin is a small model of the great Boston Harbor, teasing us with its possibilities, but filthy, misused, and inaccessible. This film is about Boston Harbor and its 30 islands, what's out there and what's happened to it, and how you can change it. At the eastern entrance of our city, the harbor opens wide like a broad, proud veranda, offering beauty and refreshment and pleasure. And what do we do with it? We use it as a toilet. You may think you see the harbor when you cross the Mystic River Bridge, but that's only the inner harbor, a home for shipping and business. Not so busy now. That's your 1963 Ford down there, being shipped to Taiwan, right next to your neighbor's Chevy. Oil pumping out, up the Chelsea River. A lot of oil comes up the Chelsea, and some ends up in it. You'd think the Navy and the Army owned most of the harbor, and a lot of it is used to spruce up the fleet. Not just today's modern Navy either. They say about 12% of the Constitution's original. I just don't know which 12%. This portion of East Boston will soon be a city waterside recreation area. Now most East Boston piers grow grass. A few freighters come in, and oil is distributed by small coastal tankers. In the future, you guessed it, right there on Border Street, high-rise apartments and office buildings. The Old North Church looks out on a lonely row of half-used wharves with ancient and romantic names, Long, Lewis, Union, housing a comfortably run-down collection of apartments and small firms, soon to shine again in a new waterfront redevelopment project. Hope they leave room for Dick Narkasian's Bay State, one of the few good ways to see the harbor. Castle Island's horizontal forest is always moving, but the container crane, finished in 1966, stands still and unused, like a giant Calder immobile. Castle Island's also good for catching Sunday dinner from the Fire Lieutenant John J. McCorkle Fishing Pier. We don't have many beaches in the city, but Pleasure Bay in South Boston is a big one. And deep in Southie, James Michael Curley's legacy is the L Street Bathhouse. Just the thing for a chilly skinny dip. But the inner harbor is only part of the story. Out there are 30 islands. Moon Island, mostly carved into unused settling basins for raw sewage. Closed down now that the Deer Island treatment plant is keeping company with the prison there. Long Island. It houses a hospital for the chronically ill and beyond it a vast plain of rubble and trash that resembles a closing scene of a Fellini movie. The Brewsters have a light, and on Pettix we found these stately old empty army quarters. Pettix is one of the few islands with real live Bostonians on it. We can't visit all the islands, so let's set down on 3 to tell our story. First, George's, with historic Fort Warren. That's a story with a past. And Spectacle, once 2 small bumps in the sea, now connected by 47 years of trash. That's our symbol for the dumping and filling and burning that ruins most of the harbor. And Lovell's, a charming place where you and I might just have a picnic this summer. George's Island. Most of its 28 acres is taken up with Fort Warren, a once proud part of American coastal defense, when wars were considered with pride. It's now slowly falling apart. The broken windows, left broken during the long winters, have allowed the sea air to tear loose most of the interior. The NDC owns the island, makes some makeshift repairs, and maintains the big new dock. It's still worth the trip, though. And the best guide is Edward Rowe Snow. He's intimate with every ghost from Hatteras to Nova Scotia.
Fort Warren on George's Island is a far cry today from when the ancient Puritans had to plan their own protection. The first man to come here was Pemberton in 1628. He was followed by John George, the man for whom the island is named. This particular location is known as the Gibraltar of America because of its perfect location with all of Massachusetts around it. This is the very center of 35 islands and ledges in the bay. This particular massive fortification is the result partly of Quincy granite and Cape Ann granite. In the later days of the fort, cement was used for the giant disappearing guns. The first gun was named for a Civil War hero, and then later we had Battery Stevenson, and still later other great guns which shot out their 600-pound shells 24 miles into the bay. The guns of the Civil War, which was perhaps the most active period of Fort Warren history, numbered 248. They also are very large, sending out a round cannonball 2 or 3 miles into the harbor. And during the Revolution, Fort Warren had its first and only battle, and that was fought between men who were training here and 2 British warships which came in not knowing that the British had left Boston forever, and 2 American craft, one of which was the Warren. That battle was an American victory, although few people in New England have ever heard of it. The Lady in Black is perhaps New England's most unusual ghost story. It all began in the Civil War in 1861, when a young Confederate captain was captured and taken to Fort Warren, where he was lodged in the corridor of dungeons. His wife found out, landed at this fort on a rainy night, came up, whistled to him, he answered, and a rope was lowered, and she was taken into the fort at one of the long musketry embrasures here. They met, they planned not to escape from the fort, but to capture the fort, turn the guns of the fort against Boston, and change the entire course of the war. But it was not to be, because they were detected, and in the battle which followed, her husband was mortally wounded. After his funeral, she was told that she must be executed as a spy. And they gave her a final request, and she asked that she be given a lady's dress to wear. They gave her the lady's dress, and wearing it, she was swung out into eternity. And after that, after she was buried by the side of her husband, 7 weeks went by, and then the first ghost-like appearance came. A group of officers, after a fresh snowstorm, were crossing the beautiful parade ground. They got about halfway across, and the leader, looking down into the snow, noticed tracks of a lady's slipper going nowhere. Here at this fort, you can step into the past of 1, 2, and 3 centuries ago. And I would like to look forward to the time when the young people and the old people can come down to Fort Warren for a real on-the-spot history lesson.
Our next island is Spectacle. It used to be 2 islands, pleasant little hills left by the glaciers, a spot for gulls to rest, a quiet spot. Spectacle glistens in the sun a mile or 2 from Pleasure Bay and the L Street bathhouse. Spectacle glistens because it's made of garbage. Spectacle also smokes and burns. It's burning now, 12 feet underground. Smoldering fires that weren't set, they just started spontaneously. The city hasn't dumped there since 1959. Spectacle just sits and glistens and burns. The inhabitants don't mind. Besides the gulls, the population's composed of a large family of rats. Spectacle symbolizes the harbor's use over the last 50 years. Dump, fill, and burn. That's what we've done with it. All the dumping is not solid by any means. On many days, the flow of sewage and industrial waste into the harbor exceeds that of fresh water. You can look for it next time you're out in a boat. But unless you climb to 3,000 feet, you may not notice that your hull is slicing through what is politely called effluents. It's some of the 60 billion gallons of treated sewage pumped into the harbor from the Deer and Nut Island plants each year. The MDC tells us that their plant at Deer Island pumps only on the outgoing tide. You sailors can check on your nautical tables for Sunday, April 26, 1970, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The tide is coming in. Dump, fill, and burn. We fill in the harbor for very useful purposes: to make and expand airports, to build massive docking facilities, to make clear level land for housing developments. But massive fill has its price. The tide's flushing actions are very subtle. Who checks on the rest of the harbor when you make 2,000 acres of new land at the airport? You remember Columbia Point. That used to be a tidal marsh. The project, as it's known, is built on the rubbish of the 50s. The University of Massachusetts in-town branch will be built on the rubbish of the 60s. right next to the old Columbia Point sewage pumping station. It may be an unsettling experience. Well, even the folks at Squantum have a question. Right next to sacred ground, the sole surviving original Indian site, that mound, the seat of the sachem, Massachusetts Hummock, for which our Commonwealth is named, a new sewer line's going to be installed right there. Why there? 30 feet from the road? Why not next to it? Could someone be thinking of doubling or tripling the road? Well, it's only marshland. What's so important about marshland? They are used as floodplains and do protect us from storms and erosion. The patina grass that grows there is food for the harbor fish, and the fish that spawn there do provide lunch for those big ones you pull in. Not everyone wants to fill the harbor. Many sand and gravel companies want to dredge Great Brewster Spit. It's just a useless stretch of sand, isn't it? If we listen to the ecologist, we'd better not tamper with nature till we know the results. What storms beat themselves out on this useless land? What sea life spawns on its kelp ledges on either side? Dump, fill, and burn. It would be nice to spend a clear day on the water. But have you ever followed the tons of smoke and ash from Boston Edison's South Boston plant? Gently shielding Pleasure Bay. Protecting Thompson's Island from the sun. Hiding Moon Island. Drifting lazily over Hangman Island. And covering West Head at Pettix. And creating a pall over Hingham Harbor. And the citizens of Hingham think pollution is Boston's problem. Multiply this sound and smoke by about 50 an hour, almost 900 a day, 320,000 a year. And you get a small sense of the sound and air pollution created by the airport alone. Come out now, far out to the Great Brewster Islands. That's it. That's your city burning. The odds and ends of urban renewal and other construction. About 2 barges a week are towed out, anchored, and set afire to burn out in the westerly breeze, not bothering anything except Great Brewster. When a storm or a thermal inversion or a sea breeze comes up, well, that plume is one more addition to the air pollution of our harbor and our city. Dump, fill, and burn. And we do them all, not just on spectacle. Boston Light on Little Brewster, our nation's oldest lighthouse, would be a more pleasant symbol. Looking like a magazine cover. But spectacle and the airport and the Deer Island sewage and the burning barges moored a half-mile south of Hypocrite Channel, well, they must take precedence. Across the old channel from Georges is Lovell's Island. It was also used for fortifications in the past. And maybe the future of our harbor is linked closely to that 62 acres of beach and scrub sumac. A unique experiment will go on there, and who knows, it just might work. is a larger island than I thought it was. What is it, about 3 or 4 miles long?
I'm not sure that it's quite that large, but it is rather large.
But it's got highlands and lowlands. From here, you can see almost the entire island. It's a much larger piece of land than I thought was in the harbor.
That's right. Well, it is one of the larger islands, I believe. There are larger pieces of the harbor, but we figured that it was a really fine one to adopt.
What do you mean, adopt an island?
Well, what we wanted to do, and when I say we, I mean the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club has become interested in the harbor really since last September. We were very interested in seeing that the harbor islands get what we feel is proper use. We are interested right here on Lovell's Island in trying to figure out how the islands could be adopted, their recreational potential can be realized.
Who owns the island now, Paul?
Right now, it's an MDC-owned island. It is in public hands, but it hasn't really been used. It hasn't been open for public use, certainly the way we would like to see it used.
Paul, what will you have to do to make the island usable?
We'll have to start with some cleanup. There's a necessity really to pick up some of the trash on the island, and we're planning to do that in May and June of this year. We've got to help provide a way for people to get out onto the island conveniently. We have to help figure out ways that they can spend their time once they're here and provide for safety. There are a number of hazards on the island that we're going to have to work on.
Well, it's a great place. It has fantastic potential. Let's
it really
go
does.
Look at it. Paul, you've got a clean beach, unpolluted water, all within 6 miles of City Hall.
Right, Mike. I think this is right where we'll start. It's already set up. Could bring people out here tomorrow and they could really use the beach. And it's really close. People drive miles and miles just to get out to the Cape for something like this, and here it is.
It's rare to find a beach just this big.
Well, there are actually several of them, I think, out here, not only on Lovell's, but there are some nice beaches over on Gallup's Island. I'm sure some of the others, Pettix, for instance, Long Island. There are quite a few of them.
The water seems unpolluted now, but what about come summer?
I don't know that it would be any more polluted in the summer. I'm sure that tests could be taken here to check on the quality of the water. It's far enough out that it's probably fairly good.
This seems to be the largest piece of real estate on the whole area that doesn't have a hill or a bunker on it.
Right, well, it's beautifully clear. It would be a great place to do a ball field, put a ball field or a football, things like that.
Yeah.
Mike, this may not look like a recreation area, but really it would be a fantastic recreation area. There are tidal pools here, and there's lots of life in those pools. Someone with a knowledge of that biology could really do a very nice job of taking people around and showing them what the intertidal zone really means.
Here's an old gun pit. It looks like it would make a natural barbecue pit, though, instead of a gun pit. Obviously, somebody's already done that. You could put benches on the side.
Right, we could put a door on that and store charcoal down there. This is exactly what we'd like to do, take what could be hazards and make creative use of them instead of putting a fence around them.
It's a natural. Paul, what was this, a First or Second World War coastal gun?
Some sort of a gun emplacement, right.
If this were a natural chasm, it would be a hazard, but it wouldn't be so much trouble to you, would it?
It probably wouldn't, no, because people wouldn't view it in quite the same way.
But this is a dangerous part for a group that we're using the island.
It could be, yes. Yes, indeed.
What do you think you'll do with it?
Well, one thing that can be done is say hands off, no one near it. We'd like, I think, to come in and actually utilize these things. That wall could be a handball court. There's a natural amphitheater here in a sense. Could cover over the actual pit and make use of it for meetings of some sort. We might want to put canvas over part of the top.
Use it as a protective tent for inclement weather?
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's big. Let's go down and look at the bottom. Well, the barge is going to give you trouble.
Right, I think it is. At low tide, you certainly can get out to it. It's too much of a hazard, I think, to let people frolic on it.
What can you do? Just mark it off as an area to stay away from?
I'm afraid we might have to do that. It would be really rough to try to move it, I'm afraid.
Where'd it come from?
Oh, it probably came. It's one of the burning barges, I would guess, that has just been left abandoned.
Paul, this is somewhat a symbol of the whole area. A marvelous ruin, probably the old administration building.
Right.
Lots of bricks tumbled down. And in the middle here, a tree growing up, coming through, nature taking over again.
We hope that it will be a little bit more than a symbol when we're done. There's an awful lot of work that has to be done on the island, but boy, the potential is really here. There are beaches for people to play on. There are fields that they can play in. There's a lot of historical interest, obviously. Really some great potential.
So many things have potential. It's a shame they don't work. You might make the difference, though. First, go see for yourself what the harbor is like. See Carson Beach and Pleasure Bay. Drive out to Long Island or Deer Island. And take the Bay State out to Georges and see if it fills you with pride. Second, join up with a group to put your muscle, your mind, and your money to work for the harbor. Try the Sierra Club, Save Our Shores, the Boston Waterfront Residents Association, the Mass Bay Yacht Clubs Association, the Squantum Women's Club, and the League of Women Voters. And third, let the city, the legislature, and the MDC know how you feel. The Moakley Bill and the Mayor's Plan need study and action. The MDC talks about buying even more islands. Well, they've owned Georges and Lovell's for years. And you can tell them what kind of job you think they're doing. Remember, it's your harbor and mine. I got to like it. Did you?
Christmas Heritage is made possible by a grant from Sun Company.
Good evening. I'm Alistair Cook. Christmas. To most of us, it means a Christmas tree, presents for the children, a time to eat a lot and drink a lot. But until about 150 years ago, it was a purely religious observance. It took Queen Victoria's Prince Albert to reintroduce the pagan symbol of the Christmas tree, and Dickens to promote the whole thing as a compulsory domestic festival. Tonight, we're going to take a look at 6 personal views of Christmas time in America.
All of my ancestors, except my father, were sea captains, and my particular interest at this moment is carrying on with the Flying Santa tradition. It was started around 1928 by William Winkapaw, who asked me to take over for him when he had a good assignment flying gold over the Andes Mountains of South America. My first real year was 1936, and here we are quite a few more years beyond. New England lighthouses are in 3 states: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. The Isles of Shoals, Cape Ann, Cape Neddick, Goat Island, Wood Island, and Seguin, far out to sea. "92% of the packages I have dropped have been received, and I know that because in each package I put a postcard addressed to me, and thus I know when I get the postcard back that they have the package. One year we tried little parachutes. They didn't work at all. The parachutes were just taken by the wind and quite often thrown into the water. In the packages, we put cigars, cigarettes, chewing gum, pen and pencil sets, balls and balloons, and various articles of candy. And if we know in advance who the kids are in the family, we put a doll in, or we put a jackknife or something like that. One of the girls, who was deeply interested in her dog enjoying the Christmas flavor, wrote to me early and said, "Please put some dog biscuits in the package." And I did that, and I got a wonderful letter back. When I have had a long flight over the lighthouses and get home and can relax a little, I think of the packages I have dropped and of the lighthouse keepers opening those packages hundreds of miles away and I get a certain satisfaction that I think is hard to forget.
Edward Rowe Snow was shown a letter by Nuske, a very strange letter that referred to treasure, and this was the first mention of it. Actually, the letter offered a reward for any clues to treasure, and particularly mentioned an old book that was somewhere buried on these islands. And John Nuske had kept this letter for over 20 years. He was the only man who knew about it. It had been given to him by a man who had searched for treasure many years ago. And now he turned this information over to Edward Rowe Snow as if he had a premonition that perhaps he himself wouldn't be able to continue the search much longer. And then a short time later, as if to verify the strange premonition, a ghastly discovery was made on one of the lonely stretches of beach. A fisherman came upon this site. The body of John Nuske. Edward Rowe Snow was the only person who knew of the existence of this treasure. And it was up to him, if anyone was going to find it or continue the search, he would be the person. And so, being an academic man, he went about it in a scientific manner, completely researched the Brewster Islands, and came upon a fascinating character known as the King of Cap Island, who had once been a pirate, it was known, or at least rumors were to that effect. And so, once again, Edward Rowe Snow went out to the Brewster Islands, this time armed with certain valuable information. Now, Bug Light here, which we saw earlier, he had discovered was once the working place of the King of Cap Island. Now it's an automatic light, but at one time it was an actual lighthouse, and it was manned by this mysterious figure, the King of Cap Island, who lived on Cap Island quite near the Brewster Islands. But perhaps the most important piece of information that Edward Rowe Snow had discovered was that at certain times of the year, at certain times of the tide, it was possible to walk from Great Brewster to Middle Brewster Island. This was an important discovery, because whereas John Nuske had made his search for treasure on Great Brewster Island, Edward Rowe Snow reasoned that if he could walk from Great to Middle Brewster, so could whoever, the pirate or whoever had buried the treasure. And so he began his search on Middle Brewster Island. He searched through all of the lonely buildings, the ruins, all of the old cellars. Now, he didn't know whether he was looking for treasure or for just clues to treasure, but particularly he remembered the old book. He did make a rather amazing discovery. It took him some time, and I want you to hear him, Edward Rowe Snow, tell you about this discovery himself.
I'll never forget that particular trapdoor on lonely Middle Brewster Island. It was approximately 3 feet square, and when we finally pulled it off and pushed it aside, I looked down into a dark pit. I wasn't too anxious to go down, but I did clamber down, and so I got down into that damp and dark cellar, and I could hear the squeal of rats. And in one corner of the cellar, I seemed to kick what apparently was a pile of rags. And as the rats scurried around, I reached down and picked up what later identified itself as a book.
The book that Edward Rowe Snow discovered was the book that John Nuske had been searching for. And it was the most important clue to treasure that had been discovered yet. He took his find, this rare book, which was written, I believe, in the 17th century, to to his old friend Miss Harriet Swift of the Boston Public Library. Miss Swift specialized in rare and unusual books, and she made a thorough study of it. She found that the content was really of little importance in the treasure search. It had to do with papal court procedure. But on page 101, she made a very important and very interesting discovery. She discovered that there were 74 pinpricks over 74 different letters, obviously an attempt at some sort of crude code. Now, they translated the page, and they found that the content, again, was of no help. So it was the arrangement of the letters that had to be solved, and it was up to Edward Rowe Snow to solve them.
Well, Ronnie, how long had he been working on this now?
Up to this point, he had been working on it almost 10 years. Almost 10 years of really arduous tasks, and now solving the code was perhaps the most difficult one. So he armed himself with books of cryptography. He tried every form of complicated code that he knew. He had help from his wife, from his friends, and he must have worked many nights on this one code. But what was eluding him, as he later discovered, was that the code was not complicated, but extremely simple. Obviously made by a pirate, probably the king of Cap Island, who was not an educated man. And simply by taking all of the marked letters, arranging them backwards, and then separating them, he discovered that there was a message. And it was especially exciting when the first two words translated were "gold is."
I can imagine, Ron, this was the most exciting moment of Mr. Snow's life up to date.
And imagine his excitement, Bill, when the full message was revealed. Gold is due east, trees, Strong Island, Chatham, outer barred. Here was direction to treasure, and the direction he took was to Cape Cod, considerably to the south of the Brewster Islands and outer Boston Harbor. He knew right where to go because he had written about Cape Cod and studied it. And Strong Island is just off of Chatham and Cape Cod. And now he began an actual search for treasure. He knew that the terrain must have changed the sand dunes that were to guide him. And fortunately, he was armed with a metal detector, one of the first of its kind that was devised by him, by his brother, who dabbled in electronics. But now he had a really hard job and a hard search in front of him. And then it was about 2 weeks from the day that he began his search in Strong Island that again the metal detector rang out its alarm. Now, he had found many pieces of scrap metal and things of little value, but of course he couldn't afford to pass up any clue, any chance of finding the actual treasure. And so when the metal detector did react, he knew he'd have to start to dig again.
You mentioned briefly over the 10 years that Mr. Snow did have some help from his wife and brother. Is that about all?
That's right. Mainly it was up to his own ingenuity and his own hard work. He did have some help, but it was quite a task. And anyone who's ever dug for anything at the beach knows what a job it is to try and dig in the soft, sliding sand. Continued his work, and then his shovel struck something metallic. And something happened to him that's happened to very few men. After all this search, he made an actual valuable discovery. And he pulled up out of this beach in Strong Island a pirate treasure chest. Inside, mixed with wet and clinging sand, he discovered over 300 coins, including valuable Spanish gold doubloons and the traditional pirate treasure, pieces of 8.
There are different kinds of treasure.